The Nintendo Switch opened up a lot for handheld fans, and most notably the ability to have well-optimized open-world games on the go. Having games like Skyrim and Breath of the Wild on the go still amazes me when I decide to replay them. But it's been a little while since the Switch last got an open-world game. At least until last week when Capcom brought one of its open-world-esque RPGs over to the handheld world for the first time. Packed with all of the DLC from its original release, here is my review of Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen for the Nintendo Switch. In the world of Dragon's Dogma, there is a bit of a cycle of rebirth and terror. A huge dragon appears to terrorize the entire world, and a special warrior connected to it known as the Arisen rises up to stop the dragon, and then the process starts all over again. Your character is the resident of a fishing village that's attacked by the dragon. In trying to defend the village, the dragon steals your own heart, and you awaken the next day as the new Arisen. With magical beings known as pawns at your command, you then go on a journey to confront the dragon and reclaim your heart. Now the thing about this game's story is there's a lot of lore and it does some very interesting things that other RPGs don't do. My main problem is how the story is told. A lot of the cinematic scenes don't dive into that much detail about what's going on, and a lot of dialogue from NPCs later on or soon after make it sound like a lot more happened than you were actually shown. It's an interesting story, there's just a lot that I feel is left out, almost as if there were a bunch of other cutscenes in the game and they cut them out of the final release. When it comes to gameplay, this is an open world-esque RPG with real-time combat, aka an action RPG. Since this is the Dark Arisen version of the game, all of the original DLC and expansion content is in this package. That means you can go through the original story mode, go through the Bitter Black Isle expanded area, and you can access your item inventory to be able to get all of that late game armor early on in the game, as well as the useful items like the Eternal Fairy Stone for infinite fast travel. Progression in this game is on you. It's a big choice related game. You do go through chapters and a lot of the content isn't unlocked until you actually progress through the main story, but you've got a lot of stuff you can do during each chapter outside of just the main story quests. There are a lot of side quests you can do, some of which are missable and around key characters for the story. And because many of these side quests can be missed, it is highly advisable that you do them while you still can. And that brings us to the affinity system and how all of that missable content can put a wrench in your plans when you're playing through the game. Creating friendships and romancing NPCs is something that a lot of open world games have done. Dragon's Dogma takes that to an entirely new level because you can raise affinity and romance almost every single character in the game. Whether it's an important character for the story like Mercedes or Kina, or that lady item shopkeeper in the middle of Grand Soren, almost every NPC in the game has quests tied to them that raises their affinity, along with presents that you can give them. And the character with max affinity becomes involved in a very important story scene late in the game. So if you miss those missions for the character you want to have max affinity with, you're going to have to do a lot of grinding for presents to slowly raise it up to where it needs to be. Now let's talk about how you actually play the game. This is an open world-esque game, so you have a huge open area that you can freely explore. And you do that exploring in parties of up to 4 different characters, and you fight enemies you find along the way in fast-paced real-time battles. Now this is a little different than combat in games like Skyrim. Dragon's Dogma is a very fast-paced game. Your attacks are very fast, and so are enemy movements and enemy attacks. Honestly, it feels like a fast-paced action game like Devil May Cry once you pull out your swords and start slashing into opponents. You don't have extensive combo systems like you do in Devil May Cry, but the pacing makes it feel like that sort of game. It's one of the charms of the game because not many open world RPGs are this fast paced, but it also ties into the difficulty because of how fast enemies move around. Now, some people compare the difficulty of Dragon's Dogma to the difficulty of Dark Souls, but I don't think that's quite accurate. There is a pretty big difficulty spike at the end of the game if you want to do any of the side missions before Chapter 2, but as long as you're constantly upgrading your weapons and equipment and always have a party of 4 characters, the difficulty never really gives you that I have to memorize everything that every enemy does so I know how to do perfect dodges feeling that Dark Souls gives you. Granted, it is a very challenging game and it gets more challenging as you go along, but unless you stop upgrading your equipment, you should never get to a point where it is literally impossible to go through it without analyzing all of the boss movements. Granted, I'm not saying the formula is perfect. It comes together pretty well for the most part, but there are a lot of quality of life things that are missing here. Some of them were fixed with DLC items like the Eternal Fairy Stone giving you infinite fast travel points, whereas in the original game you had to buy items to fast travel. But many of those issues are still here. A couple such things are the lack of a lock-on targeting feature and the lack of a proper dodge in such a fast-paced game. But even with its flaws, this is an open world game, and like others of the genre, there's a lot of content here. Across the main story campaign, you'll probably be spending around 25 to 30 hours at least, plus a good 10 to 15 hours more for the Bitter Black Isle expansion. In other words, you're getting a lot of content for the price. Now let's dive into presentation, which deserves a lot of praise. Graphically, the game looks pretty smooth for the most part, though the draw distance is a bit lacking in terms of objects that are fairly close to the screen. You can see a lot of environments in the background, but a lot of NPCs and closer objects pop up all the time when you're walking forward. Outside of the draw distance, my only complaint about presentation is the fact that it gets a little bit blurry when you're aiming down the sights of a bow and during certain cutscenes. But when you see how the game plays, you can easily forgive that. The frame rate is perfectly smooth from start to finish in docked mode and handheld mode. This game is optimized incredibly well. Now let's get out of presentation and into battery life. Dragon's Dogma has a battery range of 2 hours and 29 minutes on high settings, up to 2 hours and 58 minutes on low settings. Now, in conclusion, you can add Dragon's Dogma to the list of well-optimized open-world games on the Switch. Now, the downside, there are some small issues with the game itself, along with some blurriness and draw distance problems in handheld mode, but if you can deal with a little blurriness here and there and want a new Western RPG on the go, this will definitely fit the bill in a well-optimized form. Reviews to Go rates Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen for the Nintendo Switch a 7.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.